The deafening roar of the thundering water was all Nora Davis could hear as she clutched her 6-month-old son against her chest, her heart pounding with terror. What had begun as a gentle spring rain had transformed into a raging monster that tore through Bitter Creek Canyon with merciless force. Her wagon was already half submerged, and the murky waters continued to rise at an alarming rate. "Hold on, Samuel," she whispered to her whimpering infant. "Mama's got you." Wyoming Territory, 1878. The untamed wilderness surrounding Lead was no place for the faint of heart, especially for a young widow traveling alone with a baby. Nora had been on her way to start a new life after losing her husband to tuberculosis back in Missouri. She'd heard that Lead needed a schoolteacher, and with her education and desperate need for a fresh start, it had seemed like Providence. Now, as the floodwaters swirled around her, that dream seemed foolishly distant. The normally placid creek had swelled into a raging torrent within minutes, catching her by surprise as she'd stopped to rest her horses. The animals had already broken free in panic, leaving her stranded on what was rapidly becoming an island in the midst of churning waters. Samuel's cries grew louder, competing with the roar of the flood. Nora looked frantically for higher ground, but the water was rising too quickly. The wagon lurched suddenly as the current grabbed hold, threatening to tear it apart and sweep them both away. "Hello, anyone there?" A deep voice called out from somewhere beyond the curtain of rain. Nora's head snapped up. "Help, please help us," she screamed, her voice raw with desperation. Through the sheets of rain, a figure on horseback appeared on the opposite bank. The rider dismounted quickly, assessing the situation with practiced eyes. "Hold on, madam. I'm coming for you," he shouted, already removing his heavy coat and gun belt. Ethan Hayes had been tracking a small herd of strays when the storm hit. At 32, he'd spent most of his life in the saddle, working as a ranch foreman at the Diamond M spread outside of Lead. He knew these lands like the back of his hand, including how dangerous Bitter Creek could get during the spring rains. When he heard the woman's cries, he didn't hesitate. The distance between the bank and the rapidly disintegrating island where Nora stood with her baby was about 12 feet. The current between them was strong enough to sweep away a full-grown man, let alone a woman with an infant. Ethan sized up the situation quickly. There was a fallen tree upstream, its roots still partially embedded in the bank. If he could use that as an anchor point. "Madam, I'm going to create a way across for you," he called out, "but you'll need to trust me." Nora nodded frantically, clutching Samuel tighter as the waters rose past her ankles. The baby wailed louder, sensing his mother's fear. Ethan tied one end of his lasso to the tree roots and the other around his waist. With the rope secure, he began to wade into the churning water. The current immediately pulled at him, but he fought against it, his powerful body straining against the force of nature itself. When the water reached his chest, he knew he couldn't cross completely without being swept away. With a grunt of determination, he stretched himself full length, his feet still anchored in the muddy creek bottom and his arms extended toward Nora. "I'm going to make a bridge with my body," he shouted over the roar. "You need to step across me using my back as support. It's the only way." Nora stared at him in disbelief. The stranger was literally offering his body as a human bridge across the raging waters. It seemed impossible, dangerous, but what choice did she have? The water had now reached her knees, and Samuel's cries were becoming more frantic. "I can't," she cried. "My baby, secure him inside your coat, tight against your chest," Ethan instructed. "Then you can use both hands to balance. I won't let you fall, madam, I give you my word." With trembling hands, Nora unbuttoned her coat and wrapped Samuel inside, tying her shawl around them both to create a makeshift sling. The baby's cries softened slightly at the increased security and warmth. "Now, madam," Ethan shouted, "the water's rising fast." Saying a silent prayer, Nora took her first tentative step into the flood. The water immediately pulled at her skirts, threatening to unbalance her. She gasped as the cold penetrated her bones but kept moving forward until she reached Ethan's outstretched hands. "That's it," he encouraged. "Now step onto my back. I'll be steady as a rock." Nora placed her foot carefully on his broad shoulder, feeling his body tense beneath her weight. For one heart-stopping moment, she thought they would both be swept away. But Ethan remained firm, his body forming a human bridge across the worst of the current. "Keep moving," he grunted, the strain evident in his voice. "Don't stop." With Samuel clutched tightly against her chest, Nora walked across Ethan's back, placing one foot in front of the other with agonizing slowness. The flood waters splashed around them, soaking them completely, but Ethan held firm, his muscles trembling with the effort of fighting the current. When she reached the bank, Nora collapsed onto her knees, gasping for breath. Immediately, she checked on Samuel. Despite being wet and frightened, he appeared unharmed. Behind her, Ethan pulled himself to shore, using the rope as leverage against the current. He lay on the muddy bank for a moment, exhausted from his ordeal. "Are you all right, madam?" he asked, rolling onto his side to look at her. "Yes," Nora replied, her voice shaking. "Thanks to you, you saved our lives." Ethan got to his feet and helped Nora stand. "We need to get you both warm and dry. My horse is tied just up the ridge. Can you ride?" Nora nodded, though in truth she'd had little experience on horseback. Her journey from Missouri had been made by wagon, not saddle. "Good. My name's Ethan Hayes, madam. I work at the Diamond M Ranch about 5 miles east of here." "Nora Davis," she replied. "And this is my son, Samuel." Ethan's gaze softened as he looked at the infant. "Pleased to meet you both, though I wish it were under better circumstances." As they climbed the ridge, Nora looked back at the spot where her wagon had been. It was completely submerged now, all her worldly possessions claimed by the flood. She fought back tears. Everything she owned, the teaching certificates, the letters of recommendation, her late husband's pocket watch, and all of Samuel's tiny clothes was gone. Ethan noticed her distress. "Don't worry about your things, Mrs. Davis. Folks around here take care of their own. We'll see you right." "I'm not from around here," Nora admitted. "I was on my way to leave to take a position as the school teacher." Ethan's eyes widened slightly. "That's a stroke of luck, then. I was headed back that way myself. The town's been waiting for a teacher for months." At his horse, Ethan helped Nora mount before climbing up behind her. With Samuel still secured against her chest, they set off through the rain toward the Diamond M Ranch. Nora was acutely aware of Ethan's strong arms around her as he held the reins, his chest solid and warm against her back despite his soaked clothing. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice almost lost in the rain. "What you did, I don't know how I can ever repay you." "No need for that, Mrs. Davis," Ethan replied, his breath warm against her ear. Anyone would have done the same. But Nora knew that wasn't true. Not everyone would risk their life for strangers. Not everyone would use their own body as a bridge across a raging flood. Ethan Hayes was clearly not just anyone. The Diamond M Ranch was larger than Nora had expected. A sprawling main house stood surrounded by numerous outbuildings, corrals, and bunkhouses. As they approached, figures appeared in doorways, alerted by the sound of hoofbeats. "Ethan, where have you been?" called a stout woman from the main house porch. "And who's that with you?" "Flood survivors, Mrs. Mitchell," Ethan called back. "Need to get them warm and dry." Martha Mitchell, the ranch owner's wife, immediately took charge. Within minutes, Nora and Samuel were whisked into the house, given dry clothes, and seated before a roaring fire with hot tea and blankets. Samuel, exhausted from his ordeal, fell asleep almost immediately in a makeshift cradle fashioned from a drawer lined with soft blankets. "You poor dears," Martha clucked, fussing around them. "Traveling alone with a baby. Where's your husband, child?" "He passed away," Nora replied softly. "6 months ago, just after Samuel was born." Martha's expression softened. "I'm sorry to hear that. But you're safe now, and that's what matters." While Martha tended to Nora, Ethan changed into dry clothes and joined them in the main room. His tall frame seemed to fill the doorway as he entered, and Nora found herself studying him properly for the first time. His hair was the color of dark honey, and his eyes were a clear, steady blue that reminded her of summer skies. A scar ran along his jawline, speaking of past dangers faced and overcome. "How are they doing?" he asked Martha, though his eyes remained on Nora. "They'll be fine, thanks to you," Martha replied. "Mrs. Davis tells me she's our new schoolteacher." "If they'll still have me," Nora said. "All my papers and belongings were lost in the flood." "Don't you worry about that," Martha assured her. "Everyone knows we've been desperate for a teacher. Maxwell will ride into town tomorrow and let Judge Parker know you've arrived. He's head of the school board." "That's very kind, but I have nowhere to stay and no money to pay for lodgings," Nora admitted, the full weight of her situation settling upon her shoulders. "Nonsense," Martha declared. "You'll stay here until we get you settled. The schoolhouse has living quarters attached, small but comfortable enough for a mother and baby." Ethan cleared his throat. "The schoolhouse will need some work before it's habitable. It's been empty for over a year." "Then she'll stay here until it's ready," Martha said firmly. "Maxwell won't mind. We've plenty of room since our daughter's married and moved away." That night, lying in a comfortable bed with Samuel sleeping peacefully beside her, Nora allowed herself to cry silently. They were tears of relief, gratitude, and lingering fear. The image of Ethan Hayes stretched across the raging flood, offering his body as a bridge to safety, was burned into her mind. In the morning, Nora awoke to the sounds of a working ranch. Samuel was already awake, cooing softly and playing with his toes. She dressed in borrowed clothes, a simple blue calico dress that was slightly too large for her slender frame, and went downstairs with Samuel in her arms. The kitchen was a hive of activity. Martha was directing 2 young women in preparing breakfast while a tall, distinguished-looking man sat at the head of the table, reading a newspaper. "Ah, Mrs. Davis," the man said, rising to his feet. "Maxwell Mitchell, welcome to the Diamond M." "Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Mitchell," Nora replied. "Call me Max, everyone does," he insisted. "And it's the least we could do. Ethan told me what happened. Terrible business, these flash floods. We lose cattle every spring, but it's far worse to think what might have happened to you and the little one." Nora glanced around. "Is Mr. Hayes here?" "Ethan. He's been up for hours," Max said. "Already rode out with the men to check the damage from yesterday's storm. He'll be back for dinner, though." Throughout the day, Nora helped Martha with household chores, grateful for the chance to make herself useful. Samuel was a hit with everyone, passed from arm to arm and thoroughly spoiled with attention. "He's the first baby we've had around here in years," Martha explained. "The hands are all smitten." By late afternoon, Nora found herself watching the horizon, looking for riders returning to the ranch. When they finally appeared, her eyes immediately sought out Ethan's tall figure among them. The men dismounted at the corral, and Ethan spoke briefly with Max before heading toward the bunkhouse. He paused when he saw Nora standing on the porch and changed direction to approach her instead. "Evening, Mrs. Davis," he said, removing his hat. How are you and the little one faring today?" "Much better, thanks to you and the Mitchells," Nora replied. Samuel, hearing the deep voice, turned in her arms to stare at Ethan with wide eyes. Ethan smiled at the baby, a transformation that softened his weathered features. "He's a fine-looking boy. Strong, too, to have survived yesterday's adventure." "He's all I have," Nora said softly. Ethan's eyes met hers. "Not anymore, Mrs. Davis. Lead might be small, but it's a good community. People look out for each other here." "Please call me Nora," she said. "After what you did for us, formality seems insufficient," he nodded. "Nora, then, and I'm Ethan." Over dinner that evening, Max announced that he'd send a wagon into Lead the next day to inform the school board of Nora's arrival and to begin repairs on the schoolhouse. "Ethan will escort you to town," Max said. "You should meet the board members and perhaps order some new things to replace what was lost." "I have no money," Nora reminded them. "Everything was in my wagon." "The school board has a stipend for setting up new teachers," Martha explained. "And I'm sure once they hear your story, they'll advance you some of your salary." "I can't accept charity," Nora protested. Ethan spoke up. "It's not charity, Nora. It's an investment in Lead's future. Without a teacher, children grow up without education. Every parent in town will gladly contribute to getting you established." The next morning, Nora found herself seated beside Ethan in a wagon bound for Lead. Samuel was securely wrapped and nestled in her lap, babbling happily at the motion and new sights. "He's got a curious nature," Ethan observed. "That'll serve him well out here." "His father was the same way," Nora replied. "Always asking questions, always wanting to know how things worked." Ethan glanced at her. "You don't have to answer if it's too painful, but what happened to your husband?" Nora sighed. "James was a school teacher, too. We met at the normal school in St. Louis. After we married, we took positions at a small school in Missouri. When I became pregnant, we were so happy. But then James caught tuberculosis from one of his students. He fought it for months, but he was already weakened from a childhood bout with pneumonia. He lived just long enough to see Samuel born." Ethan was silent for a moment. "I'm sorry, that's a heavy burden to bear alone." "What about you?" Nora asked, wanting to change the subject. "Have you always been a cowboy?" Ethan chuckled. "Cowhand, ranch foreman, drover, I've been all of those. Came west from Pennsylvania after the war. Wasn't much left for me back home." "You fought in the war, Union cavalry," Ethan confirmed. "Spent 4 years seeing the worst of humanity. When it ended, I couldn't stomach going back to civilization. The open country suited me better." As they approached Lead, Nora was surprised by the size of the town. Though small by Eastern standards, it was larger than she'd expected, with several streets of buildings including a church, general store, saloon, and hotel. "How many children will I be teaching?" she asked. "About 30 last count," Ethan replied. "Ages 5 to 16. Some only come when they can be spared from farm work or when the weather's bad." The school board meeting was held in a room above the general store. Judge Parker, a distinguished man with silver hair and bushy eyebrows, presided over the gathering of 5 men who made up Lead's educational authority. "Mrs. Davis, we're delighted you've arrived safely, despite your ordeal," Judge Parker said after introductions were complete. "When we received your letter of application, we were impressed by your credentials." "About that," Nora began hesitantly. "All my documentation was lost in the flood. I have no way to prove my qualifications." The men exchanged glances. "Well now, that is unfortunate," said Mr. Wilson, the banker. "How do we know you're actually qualified to teach?" Ethan stepped forward. "Gentlemen, I can vouch for Mrs. Davis's character, and if you have doubts about her abilities, I suggest you speak with her for 5 minutes. Her education is evident in every word she speaks. Judge Parker held up a hand. No need for that, Mr. Hayes. I believe we can take the lady at her word. However, for the record, perhaps Mrs. Davis could write to her former school in Missouri for copies of her credentials. Of course, Nora agreed, relief flooding through her. Though it may take several weeks for mail to travel there and back. In the meantime, we'll advance you 2 months' salary to help you get established, Judge Parker declared. The schoolhouse needs cleaning and minor repairs, but it should be ready within a week. Thank you, Nora said sincerely. I won't let you down. After the meeting, Ethan took Nora to the general store to order necessities. News of her arrival and her dramatic rescue had already spread through town, and many people stopped to introduce themselves and welcome her to lead. Everyone's so friendly, Nora remarked as they loaded their purchases into the wagon. Small towns, Ethan said with a shrug. News travels fast, and new faces are always interesting, especially pretty ones. Nora felt a blush rise to her cheeks at the casual compliment. On the ride back to the ranch, Ethan pointed out local landmarks and told her stories about the area's history. Nora found herself laughing for the first time in months at his tales of cattle drives gone wrong and the antics of new ranch hands. "You're good with stories," she observed. "You should come tell some to the students once school starts." Ethan looked surprised. "Me? In a schoolroom?" "I've never been much for book learning. Stories are how we connect to history and to each other," Nora said. "Some of the most important lessons can't be found in textbooks." Over the next week, Nora settled into a routine at the Diamond M while preparations were made at the schoolhouse. Each morning, she helped Martha with household chores, and in the afternoons, she often sat on the porch with Samuel, watching the ranch activities. Ethan made a point of stopping by whenever he returned from his daily duties. At first, his visits were brief, a quick question about her comfort or a report on the schoolhouse repairs. But gradually, they lengthened into conversations that stretched until dinner was called. Nora learned that Ethan had been with the Diamond M for 8 years, working his way up from cowhand to foreman. He was respected by the other workers and trusted completely by Max. "He's the son I never had," Max told Nora one evening when they were alone in the parlor. "Started as just another drifting cowboy, but he proved himself a dozen times over. This place will be his someday if he wants it. Martha and I have no sons, and our daughters' husbands have their own interests." "He seems very dedicated to the ranch," Nora observed. "To the ranch, yes," Max agreed. "But he's never shown much interest in settling down. No sweetheart, no plans for a home of his own. Works from dawn till dusk, then starts again the next day." 5 days after their arrival at the Diamond M, Ethan drove Nora to town again to see the progress on the schoolhouse. Samuel came along, snug in a new carrying sling Martha had fashioned. The small wooden building at the edge of town had been thoroughly cleaned. New glass had been installed in 2 broken windows, and the attached living quarters had been swept and scrubbed. "It's not fancy," Ethan said as he showed her around, "but it's solid. The roof doesn't leak and the stove works well. You'll be warm enough come winter." Nora walked through the small apartment, just 2 rooms plus a kitchen area, and felt a surge of hope. It was modest but clean, and it would be hers. After months of uncertainty following James's death, the promise of a home and purpose brought tears to her eyes. "It's perfect," she said, turning to Ethan with a smile. He seemed momentarily taken aback by her expression. "I wouldn't go that far," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "But we'll make it comfortable before you move in. Martha's already set aside some furnishings for you." "Your kindness overwhelms me," Nora said softly. "All of you, the way you've taken us in, helped us start over. I don't know how to thank you properly." Ethan's blue eyes held hers for a long moment. "Seeing you smile is thanks enough," he said, then quickly looked away. "Let's check the schoolroom. The children will be here on Monday." The classroom was large and airy, with rows of wooden desks facing a teacher's desk and blackboard. Shelves along one wall held a modest collection of books, readers, arithmetic texts, and a few volumes of history and literature. "It's not much of a library," Ethan apologized. "It's a start," Nora replied, running her fingers along the spines. "Books can be added over time." As they were leaving, they encountered a woman heading toward the schoolhouse. She was elegantly dressed in a fashionable green traveling suit, her blonde hair arranged in an elaborate style beneath a feathered hat. "Ethan Hayes," she called, waving a gloved hand. "I thought that was you." Ethan stiffened slightly beside Nora. "Miss Harrington, this is a surprise." "A pleasant one, I hope," the woman replied with a dazzling smile. Her gaze shifted to Nora. "And who is your friend?" "Mrs. Nora Davis, our new school teacher," Ethan said formally. "Nora, this is Miss Rebecca Harrington, daughter of James Harrington, who owns the Silver Star Ranch neighboring the Diamond M." "A pleasure," Nora said, extending her hand. Rebecca barely touched her fingers before turning her attention back to Ethan. "Father sent me to invite Maxwell to dinner on Saturday. We're celebrating the new contract with the Army. You're included in the invitation, of course." "I'll pass the message along," Ethan said. "Now, if you'll excuse us, I need to get Mrs. Davis and her son back to the ranch." For the first time, Rebecca seemed to notice Samuel, who was watching the exchange with wide eyes from his sling. "Oh, a baby. How quaint," she said, taking a step back. "Well, don't let me keep you." As they drove away, Nora couldn't help but notice how tense Ethan had become. "She seems interested in you," she ventured cautiously. Ethan snorted. "Rebecca Harrington is interested in the Diamond M, not me. Her father's been trying to buy portions of our range for years. Marrying into the ranch would be an easier solution. And you're not tempted by the prospect of marriage to Rebecca?" "No." His voice was firm. "I've known her since she returned from finishing school back east. She's pretty enough, but we have nothing in common. She wants a husband who'll give her a grand house in Denver and take her to Europe. I'm happiest on horseback with open sky above me." Nora felt an inexplicable sense of relief at his answer. By Sunday evening, everything was in place for Nora and Samuel to move into their new home the next morning. Martha had sent furniture, linens, cookware, and enough food to last a week. The school board had provided teaching supplies, and several town families had contributed children's books for the classroom. After dinner, Nora found Ethan sitting alone on the front porch, smoking a cigarette and staring at the stars. "May I join you?" she asked. He immediately stood, grinding out his cigarette. "Of course, please." They sat in companionable silence for several minutes before Nora spoke. "I want to thank you again, not just for saving our lives, but for everything since. You've made this transition so much easier than it might have been." "I've done very little," Ethan protested. "You've done everything," Nora countered. "Without you, Samuel and I would have." She couldn't finish the sentence. Ethan reached over and took her hand. His palm was rough with calluses, but his touch was gentle. "You're safe now, that's what matters." The warmth of his hand around hers sent a flutter through Nora's chest. It had been so long since she'd felt a man's touch, and something about Ethan's quiet strength called to her in ways she hadn't expected. "Will you visit us in town?" she asked impulsively. "Samuel would miss you if you didn't." Ethan's smile was visible even in the dim light from the house windows. "Just Samuel." "No," Nora admitted softly. "Not just Samuel." The next morning brought a flurry of activity as Nora and Samuel prepared to leave for their new home. Martha packed extra food and insisted on sending along more blankets, in case the nights turned cold. Ethan loaded everything into the wagon and helped Nora settle Samuel in his new cradle for the journey. The baby gurgled happily, reaching up to grasp at Ethan's fingers when he tucked a small blanket around him. "He's taken a shine to you," Nora observed. "Smart kid," Ethan replied with a wink. "Knows who his friends are." The ride to town was filled with last-minute advice from Martha about the best time to visit the butcher for fresh meat, and which of the town women could be counted on for babysitting if needed. When they arrived at the schoolhouse, Nora was surprised to find several mothers and their children waiting to greet her. They helped carry her belongings inside and showed her where everything was located in the schoolroom. "We're so pleased to have a proper teacher again," said Mrs. Collins, whose twin boys would be in Nora's class. "The children have been running wild since Mr. Peterson left last year." "I'll do my best," Nora promised. When the last of the visitors had departed, Ethan helped Nora arrange her small living quarters. The main room served as both parlor and bedroom, with a trundle bed that could be pulled out from beneath Nora's larger bed for Samuel when he outgrew his cradle. The kitchen was tiny but functional, with a cast-iron stove for cooking and heating. "It's cozy," Ethan said, setting down the last box of supplies. "It's home," Nora corrected him, looking around with satisfaction. Ethan nodded, but she noticed he seemed reluctant to leave. He checked the stove one more time, made sure the windows were properly latched, and lingered by the door. "I suppose I should get back to the ranch," he finally said. "Max will need me for the afternoon roundup." "Of course," Nora said. "Thank you for everything, Ethan." He hesitated, then stepped closer and gently touched Samuel's cheek. "You be good for your mama, little man." Then, to Nora's surprise, he leaned down and kissed her cheek. "If you need anything at all, send word to the ranch." His lips were warm against her skin, and the brief contact left her flustered. "I will," she promised. After he left, Nora sat down suddenly, her hand rising to touch the spot where his lips had been. The small gesture had awakened feelings she'd thought buried with James, a flutter of anticipation, a warmth that spread through her chest. "Oh my," she whispered to Samuel, who watched her with curious eyes. "I think we may be in trouble." The next morning, Nora opened the schoolhouse doors to find 28 children of varying ages waiting eagerly for their first day with the new teacher. Their parents lingered, curious about the young widow who had arrived so dramatically in their town. The day passed in a blur of introductions, assessments, and establishing routines. Nora was grateful for her training and experience as she navigated the challenges of teaching multiple grade levels simultaneously. Samuel slept peacefully in his cradle in the corner of the classroom, occasionally entertaining the younger children during breaks with his smiles and babbling. By the end of the week, Nora had settled into a routine. Mornings were devoted to teaching, afternoons to planning lessons and caring for Samuel. In the evenings, she often received visitors' mothers bringing baked goods or offering childcare, and occasionally Judge Parker checking on her progress. Each day, she found herself watching the road from her window, hoping to see a familiar figure on horseback. But Ethan didn't come. 10 days after she'd moved to town, there was a knock at her door just as she was preparing for bed. Puzzled and slightly alarmed, Nora checked that Samuel was sleeping peacefully before approaching the door. "Who is it?" she called cautiously. "Ethan Hayes." Her heart leapt as she quickly unlatched the door. Ethan stood on her doorstep, hat in hand, looking somewhat apologetic. "I'm sorry for the late hour," he said. "We've been busy with the spring branding, and this was the first chance I had to get away." "Please, come in," Nora said, stepping aside. Ethan entered, ducking slightly beneath the low door frame. His eyes immediately went to Samuel's cradle. "He's grown," he remarked, smiling at the sleeping baby. "In just 10 days, I doubt it," Nora laughed. "I brought you something," Ethan said, reaching into his coat pocket. He withdrew a small wooden horse, intricately carved and sanded smooth. "For Samuel when he's a bit older. Max taught me whittling during my first winter at the Diamond M." Nora took the gift, turning it over in her hands. The workmanship was exquisite, each detail perfect from the flowing mane to the alert ears. "It's beautiful," she said. "Thank you." "It's nothing," Ethan said with a self-conscious shrug. "Just something to pass the time in the evenings." "Would you like some coffee?" Nora offered. "I was about to make some for myself." "I don't want to impose, you're not," she assured him. "I'd welcome the company." Over coffee at her small kitchen table, they talked about her first days of teaching and the latest happenings at the ranch. Ethan told her about the spring branding and how the ranch hands had placed bets on which of them could work the fastest. "And did you win?" Nora asked, smiling over the rim of her cup. "Naturally," Ethan replied with a grin. "I'm the foreman for a reason." As the evening progressed, Nora noticed a subtle shift in their conversation. Their words came more easily, the silences between them comfortable rather than awkward. When Samuel stirred and began to fuss, Ethan rose immediately to check on him. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward the cradle. Nora nodded, watching as Ethan gently lifted Samuel into his arms. The baby quieted almost immediately, staring up at the cowboy with fascination. "You have a way with him," Nora observed softly. "Babies are good judges of character," Ethan replied, swaying slightly as he held Samuel. "They can tell who means them harm and who doesn't." "And which are you?" Nora asked, half teasing. Ethan's eyes met hers over Samuel's head. "I would never harm either of you, Nora. I hope you know that." The sincerity in his voice touched her deeply. "I do know. From the moment you stretched yourself across that flood to save us, I've known exactly what kind of man you are, Ethan Hayes." After Samuel was settled back in his cradle, Ethan reluctantly prepared to leave. "I should let you get some rest," he said. "Teaching all those children must be exhausting." "It is," Nora admitted. "But I love it. The children here are eager to learn and the parents are supportive." At the door, Ethan hesitated again, much as he had the day he'd helped her move in. "Would it be all right if I called on you again? Perhaps Sunday afternoon?" "I'd like that very much," Nora replied, unable to keep the pleasure from her voice. Ethan's visits became a regular occurrence. Each Sunday afternoon, he would arrive at her door with small gifts, a book for her classroom, a jar of honey from the ranch's hives, or another carved toy for Samuel. They would talk for hours, sometimes taking walks through town with Samuel bundled in his sling. The townspeople quickly noticed the developing relationship. Some, like Judge Parker and Mrs. Collins, seemed pleased. Others, particularly some of the unmarried women who had set their sights on the handsome ranch foreman, were less enthusiastic. Rebecca Harrington made her disapproval clear during a chance encounter outside the general store. "Mrs. Davis," she said coolly, "I understand Ethan Hayes has become a frequent visitor to your humble abode." "Mr. Hayes is kind enough to check on Samuel and me regularly," Nora replied, keeping her tone neutral. "He feels responsible for us since the flood." Rebecca's perfectly arched eyebrows rose. "Is that what he told you? That it's responsibility driving his interest?" "We're friends," Nora said firmly. "Nothing more." "Of course," Rebecca smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Though you should know that many in town find it unusual. For a young widow to entertain a single man so frequently, people might talk." "Let them," Nora retorted, her patience wearing thin. "I have nothing to hide, Miss Harrington." As Rebecca walked away, Nora fought down a surge of anger. She knew her relationship with Ethan was innocent, but Rebecca's words had stung because they touched on her own conflicted feelings. Over the past weeks, her admiration for Ethan had grown into something deeper, something that both thrilled and frightened her. It had been less than a year since James's death. Was it disloyal to feel this way about another man so soon? And even if it wasn't, did Ethan feel the same? His attention might indeed be merely the fulfillment of a responsibility he felt toward the woman and child he had saved. These thoughts were still troubling her that Sunday when Ethan arrived. He immediately sensed her distraction. "Is something wrong?" he asked as they sat in her small parlor. Samuel was crawling on a quilt spread on the floor, occasionally pulling himself up to stand against the furniture. Nora hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "I ran into Rebecca Harrington yesterday. She implied that our friendship might be causing gossip in town." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Rebecca should mind her own business. She said people might find it inappropriate for me to receive your visits, being a young widow." "And do you find it inappropriate?" Ethan asked, his blue eyes intent on her face. "No," Nora said truthfully. "But I don't want to damage your reputation or mine. I'm the school teacher, after all. Parents expect a certain standard of behavior." Ethan was silent for a moment, watching Samuel as the baby gummed a wooden block. "Would it help if we weren't alone during my visits? Perhaps we could attend church together or join others for Sunday dinner at the hotel." "That might silence some of the gossips," Nora agreed. "But Ethan, you don't have to keep visiting if it's causing problems. I understand that you feel responsible for us after the flood, but is that what you think?" Ethan interrupted, his voice unexpectedly sharp. "That I come here out of some sense of duty?" Startled by his tone, Nora could only stare at him. Ethan rose from his chair and paced to the window, then turned to face her. "Nora, I don't visit you because I feel responsible. I visit because being with you and Samuel is the highlight of my week. Because when I'm not here, I'm thinking about when I can come back. Because you're the most intelligent, compassionate, brave woman I've ever known." Nora's heart hammered in her chest. "Ethan, I know it's too soon," he continued, his words rushing out now. "Your husband hasn't been gone a year and you're still grieving. I respect that. But I wanted you to know that my feelings for you are, well, they're more than friendship." Tears welled in Nora's eyes. "I don't know what to say." Ethan crossed the room and knelt before her chair, taking her hands in his. "You don't need to say anything. I'm not asking for promises or commitments. I just couldn't let you believe I was here out of obligation." Nora looked down at their joined hands, her small ones enveloped in his larger, work-roughened ones. "I care for you too, Ethan. More than I expected to, more than I thought possible after James. But it frightens me. Everything happened so fast, the flood, moving here, starting over. Sometimes I feel like I'm still being swept along by currents I can't control." Ethan nodded, his thumbs gently stroking the backs of her hands. "I understand. We can take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere, Nora." A sudden crash interrupted the moment. They turned to find Samuel had pulled a book from the low shelf and was sitting amid the scattered pages, looking thoroughly pleased with himself. The tension broke as they both laughed. Ethan scooped up the baby, who immediately grabbed for his hat. "You have terrible timing, young man," Ethan told him, but his smile was warm as Samuel patted his face with chubby hands. The incident lightened the mood, and they spent the rest of the afternoon playing with Samuel and discussing safer topics. But something had changed between them. A truth had been spoken that couldn't be taken back, and despite her lingering uncertainty, Nora felt a weight lift from her shoulders. When Ethan left that evening, his goodbye was different. Instead of the brief, friendly embrace they had shared in recent weeks, He drew her close and pressed his lips to her forehead in a gesture so tender it made her heart ache. "Think about what I said," he murmured against her skin. "No pressure, no expectations. Just know that I'm here, whenever you're ready." The weeks that followed brought a gradual shift in their relationship. True to his word, Ethan began escorting Nora and Samuel to church on Sundays, followed by dinner at the hotel dining room where other townspeople could see their proper, respectable interaction. But there were also private moments, his hand lingering on hers when he helped her into the wagon, the way his eyes sought hers across a crowded room, the soft words exchanged when they thought no one was listening. The town noticed, and whispers continued, but now they were tinged more with approval than scandal. As spring gave way to summer, Nora's classroom emptied as many of the older children were needed for farm work. She used the quieter days to work with the younger pupils and to take Samuel for long walks in the cooler mornings. One such morning in early July, she encountered Ethan riding into town. His face lit up at the sight of her, and he quickly dismounted. "I was coming to find you," he said, falling into step beside her. "Max sent me to invite you to the ranch for Independence Day. Martha's planning a big celebration, barbecue, dancing, fireworks. The whole town's invited." "That sounds wonderful," Nora replied. "Samuel would love it, just Samuel." Ethan teased, echoing their conversation from months before. Nora smiled up at him. "No, not just Samuel." The 4th of July celebration at the Diamond M was everything Ethan had promised. Tables groaned under the weight of food, fiddle music filled the air, and as darkness fell, the ranch hands set off fireworks that painted the sky in brilliant colors. Nora, wearing her best dress, a new one she'd sewn herself from fabric purchased with her teacher's salary, found herself the center of attention from several single men in town. But her eyes continually sought out Ethan, who was busy ensuring everything ran smoothly. As the evening progressed, he finally approached her, looking handsome in clean clothes with his hair still damp from washing. "May I have this dance?" he asked formally, extending his hand. The musicians had begun a slow waltz, and couples were forming on the makeshift dance floor in the ranch yard. Nora glanced at Samuel, who was being entertained by Martha. "Go on, dear," Martha urged. "Samuel and I are getting along just fine." Ethan led Nora to the dance floor and drew her into his arms. They moved together smoothly as though they had danced 100 times before. "You look beautiful tonight," Ethan said softly, his eyes never leaving her face. "Thank you," Nora replied, suddenly shy under his intense gaze. "You clean up rather well yourself, Mr. Hayes." His laugh was low and warm. High praise indeed from the schoolteacher. As they danced, Nora became increasingly aware of his physical presence, the solid strength of his arm around her waist, the clean scent of soap and leather that clung to him, the way his hand held hers as though it were something precious. "Nora," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I've been patient. I've tried to give you the time you needed, but I need to know, have you thought about what I said, about my feelings for you?" Nora's heart raced. She had thought of little else for weeks. "Yes," she admitted, "I have." And his blue eyes searched hers. "And I think I'm ready to stop being afraid," Nora replied. "James would want me to be happy, to give Samuel a father who loves him, and I care for you, Ethan, more than I can say." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Without warning, he lifted her off her feet and spun her around, drawing startled laughs from those dancing nearby. "Ethan," Nora protested, though she was laughing too. "People are staring." "Let them," he replied, setting her down but keeping her close. "I want everyone to know how I feel about you, Nora Davis." Before she could respond, he lowered his head and kissed her. It was gentle at first, almost questioning, but when she responded, it deepened into something that left her breathless. Around them, the music continued, but Nora was aware of nothing except Ethan's arms around her and the joy surging through her heart. When they finally separated, she noticed several approving smiles from the older couples, a few jealous glares from younger women, and Judge Parker raising his glass in their direction. "I think we've made quite a statement," Nora said, blushing furiously. "Good," Ethan replied, unrepentant. "Saves me having to make announcements." The remainder of the summer passed in a haze of happiness. Ethan courted Nora properly, taking her on picnics, attending church with her every Sunday, and bringing small gifts for both her and Samuel. The baby adored him, reaching for Ethan whenever he appeared and crying when he had to leave. By August, Samuel was taking his first tentative steps, lurching from Nora's hands into Ethan's waiting arms as they knelt facing each other on her parlor floor. "That's it, little man," Ethan encouraged as Samuel tottered forward. "Come to me." When the baby collapsed against his chest, Ethan scooped him up and swung him around, eliciting delighted giggles. Watching them together, Nora felt her heart overflow with love for both of them. Later that evening, after Samuel was asleep, Ethan took her hands and led her to sit beside him on the small sofa. "Nora, I have something I need to ask you," he began, his usual confidence replaced by uncharacteristic nervousness. "Yes," she prompted when he hesitated. Ethan took a deep breath. "I know we haven't known each other very long, just 5 months since that day at the creek. But sometimes life shows you what matters in an instant. And for me, that instant was seeing you standing there with Samuel in your arms, refusing to give up despite everything." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object wrapped in a handkerchief. Carefully unfolding it, he revealed a simple gold band with a small sapphire. "This was my mother's," he explained, "the only thing of hers I still have. I've carried it with me all these years, waiting for the right woman to give it to." Nora's breath caught as he slid from the sofa to one knee before her. "Nora Davis, I love you. I love Samuel as if he were my own son. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Tears filled Nora's eyes as she looked at the man before her, this strong, gentle cowboy who had literally made himself a bridge to carry her and Samuel to safety. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Ethan, I'll marry you." His hands trembled slightly as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. "It's beautiful," she said, admiring how the deep blue stone caught the lamplight. "Like your eyes," Ethan replied, rising to sit beside her again. "The moment I saw it on my mother's hand as a boy, I thought it looked like a piece of sky captured in gold." He kissed her then, a kiss full of promise and passion that spoke of all the years they would share. News of their engagement spread quickly through Lead. Most offered hearty congratulations, though Rebecca Harrington made a point of expressing surprise at the hasty arrangement. "Are you quite certain you're ready for another marriage so soon?" she asked when she encountered Nora outside the church. "After all, it's barely been a year since your husband passed. When you know something is right, Miss Harrington, time becomes less important," Nora replied evenly. "Ethan and I are very sure of our feelings." Rebecca's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Well, I wish you both every happiness. Ethan is a fine man, steady, hardworking. Not particularly sophisticated, of course, but I suppose that's not what you're looking for." "No," Nora agreed pleasantly. "What I'm looking for is a man of integrity, kindness, and courage. I found that in Ethan, along with a love I never expected to find again." "Good day, Miss Harrington." The wedding was set for early October, when the fall roundup would be complete, and before winter weather made travel difficult for those coming from outlying ranches. Martha insisted on hosting the ceremony and reception at the Diamond M. "You're like family now," she told Nora, "and that schoolhouse is far too small for the celebration you deserve." As the date approached, Max pulled Ethan aside one evening after dinner. "Walk with me," he said, leading the younger man toward the corral where the horses dozed in the twilight. "Something wrong?" Ethan asked. "No, something right," Max replied. "Martha and I have been talking. We're getting older, Ethan. Neither of us has the energy for running this place like we used to." "You're still the best rancher in the territory," Ethan protested. Max chuckled. "Flattery won't change facts. The truth is, we've been thinking about the future of the Diamond M for some time now. Our daughters have their lives elsewhere. This place needs someone who loves it, who'll care for it as we have." Ethan leaned against the corral fence, watching Max carefully. "We want you and Nora to have the Diamond M," Max said simply. "Not all at once. We'll draw up papers making you a partner first, with full ownership passing to you when Martha and I are gone. But you'd run things day to day, make the decisions that need making." Stunned, Ethan stared at his mentor. "Max, I don't know what to say. The Diamond M is your life's work. And what better hands to leave it in than yours?" Max clapped him on the shoulder. "Think about it. Talk it over with Nora. But know the offer stands whenever you're ready." That night, Ethan rode to town immediately to share the news with Nora. She listened with wide eyes as he explained Max's proposal. "Ethan, that's incredible," she said when he'd finished. "The Diamond M is one of the most successful ranches in the territory. It would mean moving from town," Ethan pointed out. "You'd have to give up teaching, at least for a while." "I wouldn't ask that of you if it's not what you want." Nora considered this. "I love teaching, but I love you more, and raising Samuel on the ranch would be wonderful for him. Perhaps someday when he's older I could teach again. Or maybe I could tutor the ranch children who can't make it to town regularly." Ethan pulled her into his arms. "Have I told you lately that you're the most amazing woman I've ever known?" "Not since yesterday," Nora teased. "I was beginning to wonder." On their wedding day, the Diamond M was transformed. Lanterns hung from trees, tables were set up on the lawn, and the bunkhouse was cleared for dancing. Flowers adorned every surface, their fragrance mingling with the scent of roasting beef. In the main house, Martha helped Nora dress in the bedroom that would soon be hers and Ethan's. The wedding dress was new ordered from Denver at Martha's insistence, a confection of ivory silk and lace that made Nora feel like a princess in a fairy tale. "Something borrowed," Martha said, fastening a pearl necklace around Nora's throat. "These were my mother's." "They're beautiful," Nora said, touching the smooth orbs gently. "Thank you, Martha, for everything." The older woman's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "No, child, thank you for bringing such joy to Ethan's life and to ours." Samuel, now 10 months old and dressed in a tiny suit, was carried by Martha to join Max, who would walk Nora down the aisle created between rows of chairs on the ranch lawn. "Ready?" Max asked when Martha signaled that everyone was in place. Nora nodded, her heart too full for words. The small gathering rose as she appeared. Friends from town, ranch hands and their families, and even a few of Nora's students watched as she walked toward Ethan, who stood beside the minister, his expression one of awe and adoration. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. They exchanged traditional vows, promising to love and cherish each other for all their days. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan kissed her with such tenderness that several of the women dabbed at their eyes. The celebration continued well into the night. After their first dance as husband and wife, Ethan and Nora circulated among their guests, accepting congratulations and good wishes. Even Rebecca Harrington appeared, offering stiff congratulations before departing early. As midnight approached, Ethan found Nora sitting on the porch, Samuel sleeping against her shoulder. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, settling beside her. "May I say how breathtaking you look in that dress?" "You may, Mr. Hayes," Nora replied with a smile. "Though I'm looking forward to changing into something more practical, I'm afraid to breathe too deeply in these stays." Ethan laughed. "I'll be happy to help you with that problem later." Nora blushed at his implication, though a pleasant anticipation fluttered in her stomach. "Are you happy?" he asked more seriously, his hand finding hers. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Nora assured him. "When I lost James, I thought my life was over. But then you stretched yourself across that flood and became a bridge to a new beginning for Samuel and me." Ethan raised her hand to his lips. "I'd do it again in a heartbeat." The party continued around them, but they remained on the porch, speaking quietly of their hopes for the future as Samuel slept peacefully in Nora's arms. The stars shone brightly above the ranch that would be their home, their legacy to Samuel and any other children they might be blessed with. Life in the Wyoming territory wasn't easy, even in the relative comfort of an established ranch. The winters were harsh, the work never ending, and the isolation sometimes difficult. But Nora found unexpected joy in her new role as the wife of the Diamond MTK's foreman turned partner. Martha took pleasure in teaching her the intricacies of running a ranch household, preserving food, managing supplies, and caring for the occasional injured ranch hand. Nora's teaching skills weren't wasted either. Several of the ranch families brought their children to the main house 3 times a week for lessons. Samuel thrived in the ranch environment. By his first birthday, he was walking confidently and beginning to form words. His first clear word was "Dada," directed at Ethan as he entered the house after a long day with the cattle. Ethan had frozen in his tracks, his eyes wide. "Did he just—" "He did," Nora confirmed, smiling at the expression on her husband's face. Ethan had crossed the room in 3 long strides, scooping Samuel up and tossing him gently in the air. "Say it again, son. Who am I?" "Dada," Samuel had crowed, delighted with the game and the attention. That night, after Samuel was asleep, Ethan had held Nora close in their bed. "I never thought I could love someone else's child as my own," he admitted. "But that boy has my whole heart, just like his mother." "He's your son in every way that matters," Nora assured him. "James gave him life, but you'll be the father he knows and loves." As the months passed, their happiness only grew. Max gradually turned more responsibility over to Ethan, who proved to be as skilled at management as he was at ranch work. Under his guidance, the Diamond M expanded its operations, increasing both cattle production and profits. In the spring of 1880, Nora discovered she was expecting their first child together. The news brought both joy and anxiety. Childbirth on the frontier was always dangerous, and Nora couldn't help but remember the many women she'd known who had died bringing life into the world. Ethan insisted on bringing a doctor from Cheyenne to stay at the ranch for the final month of her pregnancy, an expensive precaution that Nora initially protested, but eventually accepted as a sign of his love and concern. Their daughter, Elizabeth Martha Hayes, was born on a cold December morning after a mercifully short labor. She had Ethan's blue eyes and a dusting of dark hair that Nora insisted would eventually match her father's honey-brown shade. "She's perfect," Ethan whispered, cradling the tiny bundle with hands that seemed impossibly large against her delicate form. "Just like her mother." 2-year-old Samuel peered at his sister with solemn curiosity. "Baby?" he asked. "Yes, Samuel," Nora replied, reaching out to stroke his cheek. This is your sister, Elizabeth. Can you say Elizabeth? Lizbeth, Samuel pronounced carefully. Ethan laughed. Close enough. You're a big brother now, Samuel. That's a very important job. As the years passed, their family continued to grow. A son, Maxwell James Hayes, joined them in 1882, followed by another daughter, Catherine Rose, in 1885. The children filled the ranch house with laughter, tears, and the constant energy of youth. Samuel grew into a thoughtful, intelligent boy who inherited his birth father's love of learning and his adoptive father's skill with horses. By the time he was 10, he was accompanying Ethan on shorter cattle drives and helping to break the gentler horses. In 1888, when Samuel was 11, Ethan legally adopted him, making official what had been true in their hearts for years. The boy proudly took the Hayes name, though Nora made sure he knew and remembered James Davis, keeping a small portrait of him beside her bed. Your father would be so proud of the young man you're becoming, she told Samuel on his 12th birthday. And so are we. The Diamond M prospered under Ethan and Nora's stewardship. When Martha passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1890, and Max followed her 6 months later, couldn't live without her. The ranch hands said knowingly the transition of ownership was smooth and expected. Wyoming achieved statehood that same year, bringing changes that rippled through the territory. Lead grew from a small settlement into a proper town with a bank, a school building large enough for all the local children, and even a small hospital. Through it all, Ethan and Nora's partnership remained strong. They weathered droughts, blizzards, market crashes, and the occasional conflict with neighbors over water rights or grazing boundaries. Each challenge seemed to strengthen their bond rather than weaken it. By 1898, 20 years after that fateful day at Bitter Creek, the Diamond M was one of the most respected ranches in Wyoming. Samuel, at 21, had returned from college in Denver with new ideas about breeding practices and range management that Ethan, now in his 50s but still strong and vital, was wise enough to consider and often implement. Elizabeth, at 18, had inherited her mother's love of teaching and was preparing to attend normal school back east. Maxwell, 16, was the image of his father at the same age, while Catherine, 13, combined Nora's gentle nature with Ethan's determination. On the 20th anniversary of their meeting, Ethan surprised Nora by taking her back to Bitter Creek. The volatile waterway that had nearly claimed her and Samuel's lives was peaceful now, gurgling innocently between its banks. It's hard to believe this is the same place, Nora remarked, looking at the placid creek. It seems so harmless. Nature can turn on you in an instant, Ethan replied, his arm around her waist. But sometimes it brings you exactly what you need exactly when you need it. Nora leaned her head against his shoulder. At 43, her hair was beginning to show strands of silver, and the years of frontier living had etched fine lines around her eyes. But to Ethan, she was as beautiful as the day he'd first seen her. You ever regret it? She asked. Stretching yourself across that flood, taking responsibility for a widow and someone else's child. Ethan turned her to face him, his blue eyes as clear and intense as ever despite the crow's feet at their corners. Not for one single moment, he said firmly. That day changed my life in the best possible way. Before you and Samuel, I was just existing, working hard, doing my job, but not really living. You gave me purpose, family, love. And you gave us a future when we had none, Nora replied, reaching up to touch his face. The beard he'd grown in recent years was more salt than pepper now, but it only added to his distinguished appearance. You were our bridge to safety then, and you've been our foundation ever since. Ethan smiled, the same smile that still made her heart skip after all these years. Pretty words from the schoolteacher. True words from a grateful wife, Nora corrected him. He kissed her then, a kiss that held 2 decades of shared joys and sorrows, triumphs and struggles, a kiss that promised many more years to come. As they rode back to the Diamond M, where their children and grandchildren awaited them, Nora reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought her to this moment. The loss that had sent her west, the flood that had nearly ended her journey, and the cowboy who had literally become a bridge to her future, all part of a path she could never have imagined but would never wish to change. The ranch came into view as they crested the final hill buildings that had been expanded and improved over the years, pastures dotted with cattle, corrals filled with horses bearing the Diamond M brand. Home, in every sense of the word. Samuel, now a man grown but still with the same inquisitive eyes he'd had as a baby, rode out to meet them. Behind him came his wife Anna and their 2-year-old son, James Ethan Hayes, named for both his grandfathers. "Welcome home," Samuel called. "The others are waiting." Elizabeth's train got in early, and she's full of stories about the city. As they approached the ranch house, the rest of the family spilled onto the porch. Elizabeth, elegant and educated but still their prairie girl at heart. Maxwell, tall and confident in his role as the ranch's future. Catherine, blossoming into a beauty with her mother's compassionate spirit. And the youngest Hayes, 10-year-old Robert, a surprise blessing who had arrived when Nora was 43 and had been doted on by his siblings from the moment of his birth. Ethan helped Nora dismount, his hands as steady and gentle as they had been 20 years earlier when he'd first reached for her across the floodwaters. "Look at what we built," he said softly, gesturing toward their family and home. "Together," Nora reminded him, taking his hand in hers. Always together. Hand in hand, they walked toward the future they had created, a future that had begun with a desperate mother, a helpless infant, a raging flood, and a brave cowboy who had formed a bridge with his body, and in doing so had built a bridge to a lifetime of love.